get to see my lovely face for a few minutes before the meeting starts. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to give you the host back if it lets me have. Welcome, everybody. I'm Robert Haas here with Glenn. Just welcome. I hope everybody has a wonderful class.
So far, nobody's on.
Nobody's on, but on YouTube, we
It'll
know
be on
everyone's
YouTube. That'll be fine. Yeah, I have to get used to that.
There you go. Make host. All right. Glenn, you are now the host. And I'm going to my meeting. So everybody have a good one. If you need me for anything, Glenn, just give me a call.
Will do.
All right. Have a first class, everybody. Enjoy.
Sure.
Oh,
You'll be on YouTube. You're on YouTube.
oh, hi, YouTube. I'm glad you told me. I was going to say something weird.
Good afternoon. Evening. Actually, it is now.
Good afternoon.
You're the first one to sign on.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can open up your video if you like.
Okay.
In fact, I prefer it.
Okay.
It gives me good able to get feedback from eyes and faces. If somebody makes a scrunched up face, I understand. Maybe they have a question, or
Right, right.
maybe
Fair
I
enough.
said something horribly wrong. And just letting everyone know we're also streaming and recording on YouTube.
Okay.
So if you need to go back and go, what did he say about whatever, you can go back to YouTube and it'll be easier than waiting for a link to go back to Zoom.
Okay.
Because most everybody has YouTube. It's fairly ubiquitous.
Yeah, yeah, for the most part.
Fairly ubiquitous is probably an understatement, but yeah. Are you here in Savannah or
I'm actually in Hinesville.
Hinesville? Okay.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, so close enough. I Yeah, I grew up in the Savannah area, so
Yeah, I know Hinesville pretty much. Camp Swampy.
yeah. That's what I'm assuming you're in Savannah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're familiar with Camp Swampy, you know where that comes from.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
Sad, sad. Or actually, I know it wasn't sad. It was Beetle Bailey. Beetle Bailey cartoon.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
at Camp Swampy. And the guy
Yeah.
who, Mort Walker, the guy who did that cartoon, was stationed at Fort Stewart and did not go to Europe or, yeah, did not go to Europe because the war ended
Okay.
while
Yeah,
he was
no,
training.
it reminds me of Camp Blanding in Florida. It kind of reminds me of that. It's pretty much like a swamp.
Well, a lot of Fort Stewart is on the river swamp for
Yeah.
the Canoochee River.
Yep.
Yeah, I fished on that. I grew up fishing on the Canoochee and Ogeechee rivers when I was a child.
Okay.
Hello, Denise. You're muted. You can. I will ask everybody to mute once we get started, and if you've got questions, you can unmute and ask the question. And in fact, I I love questions because it keeps me on my toes, and maybe something I will learn something from the question if I have to go research, which is not unusual. I don't know everything. I am working on it, but I don't know everything yet. We're
Well,
still
hello.
a little. Hello, pardon.
I said, well, hello.
Hi. Where are you zooming in from?
I'm right down Whitmarsh Island.
Oh, okay. Not.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm just on the other side of the marsh, on the south side of Savannah.
Hmm.
In fact, I can throw a rock and hit the marsh uh, from my house. Well, I used to be able to. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Give everybody a chance to sign up. In fact, for the first night, we'll give about 5 minutes past
Okay.
before we actually really start. My name is not Congregation Mikveh Israel. My name is Glenn. So, but I'll do a formal um, introduction once everybody is on. There's usually a log jam right at 6:30 with everybody getting
Yeah,
on.
I figured.
And I usually sign on about 15 minutes early if any, and that way if you have a question or want to just chat, that's cool. I'm good
Okay.
with that. Um, hello, good
Hello.
afternoon. You can unmute right now. That'd be fine. You can there you can talk amongst the folks that are already on, and you can talk at me, or you can leave it muted. Either way.
The only reason we'd mute is because we've got two little kids running around. We're trying to keep them entertained with TV, but
I understand that. I have a cat and a wife, so yeah. I see the television in the background
So, yeah.
in the
oh.
mirror. Yeah.
You can't hear it, can you?
And
Just
I
want to make
no, and I see two
Okay.
little heads. Don't worry about it. I was young once, a long time ago, but I still remember it. And that's always the time when the kids come. You're on the telephone or you're doing something like this. Mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy.
It's true.
they've been on their best behavior. They know what we're doing.
Good, good. Hello, Natalie.
Hello.
Well, we've got about half the folks. Well, there are about 9 who said they would tune in. So we've got uh, over half because we can't cut a person in half. So and we'll give it another few minutes and then we'll get started. Just depends how orthodox a person is, a Jew is, to how punctual they are. There's Eastern Standard Time, there's Southern Time, and then there's Jewish time.
Right.
There, but Reform Judaism, if you say you start at 10 o'clock, you start at 10 o'clock.
Do you live in Savannah?
I do. I live on the south side of Savannah in House in Bluff, if you know where that is, if by any chance.
Nice.
No,
Okay, yeah.
are y'all in Savannah?
We're in Richmond Hill.
Richmond Hill. Okay, close enough. I know Richmond Hill. I used to hunt and fish there, but now every place where I used to hunt and fish is a housing development.
Yeah, it's blowing up around here for sure.
Yeah.
I've been trying to find a place to go deer hunting because I want to get some venison. I grew up in Michigan hunting, and I feel like I got to meet someone that has land, like a farmer or something. That
Well, what you need to do is get in touch with a. Hi, Natalie.
I have land, I have deer. They come up to our house every morning at about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, really? That's funny.
Here
Yeah.
we go.
But I'm
Come
up in
hunting season. There you go. And we'll talk about why Jews don't hunt and why Jews don't eat meat that's been hunted when we get to the dietary. But there are a lot of Jews who hunt, especially those out west, and I guess in Midwest also. Not so much in the Northeast and the South.
Oh, sorry, I have a four-legged friend who's clawing at me.
A cat or a
That's
dog?
okay.
Well, I guess a cat if it's clawing. Yeah.
Dogs and cats are allowed
Big dog.
online.
Oh, a
Oh,
dog. Okay.
oh,
Big dog.
Aw. Our
I,
dog might come visit us too. He's a big white dog.
oh,
My cat won't. My cat won't go. What are you doing? Yeah, you want me there? No, I won't be there.
Hello.
Dogs have masters, cats have staff.
Hmm.
Okay, we'll give it another minute and then we'll get started. Generally speaking, if I have 9 people registered, I have 4 to 5 people who sign in the first day. It's very much. I was talking to the rabbi, and he says, "Is that pretty normal?" And I said, "Yeah, that's pretty normal." Just like my nursing class, we started out with 120, I think 125 students, and we graduated 41. and that was about average. Some people find out that's not for me. Some people find out I can't do this, and some people just go, "Oh, I flunked out," and they start again the next year and they pass. So it's just like driving test, I guess. I took it several times. Okay, well, we'll get started. It's 6:35. This is, if to make sure that you're here for the right reason, this is Introduction to Judaism. This is our first class. Um, I am Glenn Kersey. Uh, I My bona fides are I have a bachelor's degree in history from, well, it was Armstrong State College when I attended it. Now it's uh, a satellite campus of Georgia Southern University. Also a minor degree in anthropology. I also have Associates of Arts in Nursing. Why it's not a science degree, I don't know. But it was an Associate of Arts in Nursing from Columbus College, which is now Columbus State University. My primary interest in history was Europe from the medieval period, beginning of the medieval period to the Age of Exploration, along with Eastern studies. And I worked for about 5.5 years as a retail manager with Kmart. And then I went back to school and became a nurse. And I don't have to tell anyone, but I do tell folks, if you're concerned about, oh my gosh, are they, if you're thinking about conversion, you don't have to be. It could be just for general interest. But if you're thinking about conversion, you, I'm a Jew by choice. And I always say that anyone who is a Jew and who is observant is a Jew by choice, because we'll talk about who is a Jew, who can be a Jew. Okay, we got one more coming. Adam. Welcome, Adam. We're just getting started. I was introducing myself. I'm Glenn Kersey, and I was introducing my bona fides. Uh, got a degree in history, and I'm a registered nurse. I'm a Jew by choice, and I've been studying Judaism probably very intensely since I was 20, 21 years old. I'm not going to go into the whole reasons why I converted to Judaism. That could take several hours, and we don't have that time. But I always tell people that I am a Jew by choice, because they start asking, do you know so and so? Do you know so and so? Have you been a member of this congregation long, et cetera, et cetera? I've been a member of Congregation Mikveh Israel for about 5.5 years, almost 6 years now. Uh, After I retired from nursing, we moved to Savannah. I was born and raised here in Savannah. Went through college here in Savannah, and after college moved away because my work took me away. And when I retired, my wife and I moved back to Savannah. We wanted to be close to home, and it was pretty good because as soon as I retired, I was diagnosed with cancer, and then later stage 4 cancer after we realized it had metastasized past the initial stage. And I am still in treatment. So if I show up and I start acting weird or everything, I'm still taking chemo. So, and my wife calls some of those slip ups and weird days chemo brain. So I try to keep those within a minimum. But if I do start saying things weird, ask me and I'll calm down, and I'll probably go back to saying things right. I sometimes have trouble with word finding, and um, I get I'll get on tangents, so keep me in line, and I'll try to stay off tangents as much as possible. But I do have an excuse, and I blame it on the chemo when I can. But otherwise, it's not. Um, I have been a Jew for 20 plus years now, since 2002. So that's where this is 26. So it'll be 24 years come this November. So 23 and change. I don't know everything. Like I said before, I am working on that, but I'll probably never know everything because it is a daily thing. If I don't learn something on a given day, it's a wasted day for me. So, um, what we're going to talk about today is who are the Jews? Where did we come from? Where did we go? How did we get there, Cotton Eye Joe? Um, Number one, I want to say without any reservation, Jews are not a race. Number one, there's no such thing as race. As a student of anthropology, uh, race, the idea of race, of there being Caucasian, Negro, um, uh, Asian, South Sea Island, all of these derivations. Federal government can say that all they want, but anthropologists know that there are humans and there are clans of humans. Those of you who have dogs know that Chihuahuas are dogs. Also, are dogs the Great Pyrenees and the Great Dane, monstrous dogs that would eat Chihuahuas for lunch and be hungry. Um, but they're all dogs, and genetically they're almost identical. Same with every human being on the earth. We are almost genetically identical. In fact, almost genetically identical to chimpanzees. But that's another day, another topic for another day. So there's no such thing as a race, only clans. You have differences in right here. If you looked at the individuals who are displayed across here, we show variations in hair color, complexion, and we'd all be considered Caucasian persuasion. But I don't know who persuaded us to be that way, but that's what everybody would say. But there are variations in amongst of us. There are probably more variations in skin color, etc., across any group. I've always said that some Jews are good with money, but not all. Some Black people have natural rhythm, but not all. Some Asian people all look alike, especially twins. But other than that, across the board, we're human beings. There's no such thing as race. So Jews are not a race, no matter what Mr. Hilter might have said. Um, Judaism is a faith, a culture, and less specifically an ethnicity, because there are Jews of every race, creed, color, nationality across the board. In fact, one of the leaders of our our Reform movement is Rabbi. Let's see, I can remember her name now. Of course, I can't remember it. I should have written it down. But she is of Korean and American ancestry. But she was the first Asian American cantor, and she was the first Asian American rabbi. There are others since her, but she was the first. Rabbi Bugdal, who is actually the senior rabbi at Central Synagogue in Manhattan, one of the largest synagogues in the country, and she is the rabbi there. She is a rabbi, and she is Asian and American of ancestry. So Jews can come in all shapes and colors. There are Jews from Falasha Jews from Ethiopia. There are individuals who have converted to Judaism. Their ancestors converted, and they are African or African American. So there, it is primarily a faith and a culture. Where did we come from? Where did the idea, where did the faith come from? Our scripture says that we came basically with a man named Abram out of Ur of the Chaldees. Well, that's a problem in and of itself, because the Chaldeans were not in Ur until around between 6 and 700 before the Common Era, where Father Abraham would have lived somewhere around 1200 to 1100 before the Common Era. So we're looking at 500 years of the Chaldeans not living in Ur. But when everything was written down, the Chaldeans were living there. Of course, the Chaldeans have always lived there, right? We've had televisions. Their televisions have been around, and cell phones have been around forever, right? Ask a child. They'll tell you that televisions and cell phones have been around, well, forever. It's been around for their forever. And nothing has changed in human beings. Your forever is everybody's forever, no matter what the time frame. Our other part of our scripture says, and Ur of the Chaldees, Ur is a city in Mesopotamia. If you're not familiar with Mesopotamia, that is the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in what is now Iran and Iraq. Everybody knows where Iraq is because, well, for a long time, we had a lot of people going to Iraq, meeting lots of interesting people and shooting at them and having them shoot at them. So everybody pretty much knows where Iraq is. It's also where the city of Baghdad is, and Baghdad was a major city in Mesopotamia. And many cities have been, and civilizations have been in that one area. And that is north of what we think of as Israel in the Levantine area. There is a new name for the Levant. I grew up learning Levant. The Levant is the area that is currently Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and part of southern Turkey. So it's easier than saying the area that is all of those countries, simply saying the Levant. There's actually a new name for that, and I've got to learn it. I read it the other day, but I didn't write it down, so I didn't learn it. But another part of our tradition says that my father, meaning our ancestors, was a wandering Aramaean. Okay. The Aramaeans were a people out of Saudi Arabia, which is south and east of Israel. So, did our ancestors come from Ur of the Chaldees, or did our ancestors come from south from Saudi Arabia? Scripturally, the answer is yes. And it's like going, do you want chocolate or vanilla? Uh-huh. Yeah. It doesn't really matter. Current archaeological and anthropological evaluation of skeletal remains indicates that the Canaanite people if you're familiar with the Christian Bible or the Hebrew Bible for that matter, uh, they're always the Canaanites are always the enemies of the Israelites. Yeah, and um, most of the anthropological studies, the DNA studies of remains, um, and the physical evidence in sites that are known Israelite settlements have indicated there's no real difference between a Canaanite and an Israelite. So, contrary to what our scripture says, Israelites were likely Canaanites. And much of one of the other things that from this you can already tell my leaning is uh, the, the scriptures are not univocal. The scriptures are not empowered with all knowledge, are not, in my opinion, uh, written by God, written by people, inspired by faith. There is some facts in the scriptures, a lot of truth, but it is it's not history. There is some history to be found in it, but it is not history in and of itself. Amongst the Canaanites in the area of the Levant, where these people lived, and early on they were a transhumance people. Transhumance has a wonderful anthropological word meaning they followed herds from summer pasture to winter pasture, basically from when it's raining and you got something to eat for them, and when it's not raining, you move to where it's raining and then you've got something to eat for them. The area in the Levant is not sheep country. All of us have seen the pictures of individuals. It could be King David, could be Moses, could be Jesus standing on these verdant rolling hills, dressed like a Roman senator, holding this crozier, which is the shepherd's staff with the hook on it. That's a crozier, and this wonderful blue sky, sunny, big, fluffy, giant sheep. The Levant is goat country, scrub country. So when it says sheep, it means goats. And in fact, if you ask for mutton in the Mediterranean or Pakistan or India or Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq, you're just as likely to get goat as you are likely to get sheep meat. In fact, more likely most of the time to get goat because that is the predominant animal. They had a common ancestor and they live in sheep have different needs than goats do. So sheep were kept for specific things like milk, and goats were kept for fiber and for meat on special occasions. But also milk because you get good milk from goats, and from that, don't think fresh milk. Yeah, kids might drink it every once in a while, but for the most part, people in that part of the world are lactose intolerant, so they have to eat their dairy products in the form of cheese. And um, and especially with hunters and gatherers and herds people, they are opportunist. They will hunt, they will gather, they will tend sheep, they will trade cheese for wheat to grind wheat and barley to grind grain. So you've got this interdependence between the early farmers and these people who were shepherds. There's a tradition amongst Jews that we were shepherds for so very long. Not really. We were as shepherds for as very long as it took to go, hey, agriculture. And there was this huge agricultural boom about 10,000 years ago. So, and 10,000 years ago, there was nobody recognizable as a quote unquote Hebrew or a Jew, no matter what things say. But the more uh, fundamental people are, the more they think that the earth is only about 5,000 years old. So it doesn't matter what people were doing 10,000 years ago because they were doing it on a non existent planet. In Canaan, there was a primary god. His name was El, E-L, easy. He was the predominant god in that region for a very long time. He was basically the husbander. He was the guy who took care of everybody, took care of everything. If you could think of a god having being very wise and having a very long beard and taking care of people and making sure everybody had everything they needed, that was El. Well, in fact, in our scriptures, we hear about El quite a bit because one of the first names that God is given is El Shaddai, and it's been translated as God Almighty. And then Father Abraham, who is a follower of El Shaddai, goes to meet a guy named Melchizedek, who is the king of Yarushalayim, which were two cities. But he was king of both of them. He was king of Salam, but later king of Jerusalem. It actually was two cities. He was the king, and he worshipped El Elyon, which is God Most High. And then there were El, you name it, there was an El. Every little farming community, which was a walled city, had their own god. And this was extant until about between 600 and 700 before the Common Era. At that time, another god came into being who was a storm god, a young guy, really tough. His name was Yah. And we'll hear those in names like Samuel, one of the prophets, Shmuel. He was a follower of El. Anything that ends with El or begins with El, named Eliyahu. Oh my God, now we're mixing it up. He's right at the transition. Yah is God. El is God. Yah is also God, but Yah is God is what Eliyahu means, Elijah. I could spend weeks talking about the names of God and who God was and God's wife. Did you know God had a wife? Yeah, he did originally. We got rid of it in that period between about 600 and 700 before the Common Era. Oh, Common Era. I don't use AD and BC. Before the Common Era is the same as BC, and Common Era is the same as AD. About the only people who use AD and BC anymore are people in the United States. The rest of the world uses BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, Common Era. Especially as a Jew, I don't use it because AD means what? Anyone know?
After death.
It means Anno Domino, year of our Lord. And our Lord is, we've got to give you another one, BC, before Christ. So Anno Domini is the year of our Lord, the beginning of the year one, and BC, before Christ, not my God. So therefore, I like BC and BCE, and so does most of the Western world, other than the United States and Asia and the rest of the world. Let's see. So beginning in and around 600 BCE, all of the cults of ale, and I say cult, and people go, "Oh my God, are you calling it a cult?" Yes, every major religion in the world started as a cult with a small c, not a cult with a big C. Cult with a big C is Kool-Aid, and we're going to kill ourselves and get on the spaceship, and that's cult with a big C. Um, Cult with a small c is just a small number of people, and every major religion started out as a cult. That always brings me to what is the largest religion in the world currently? Anyone have any idea? The greatest number of followers.
Buddhism?
Actually, Islam is a good answer.
No, Buddhism.
Actually, Christianity.
Huh.
Number one. Number two is Buddhism. Number three is Islam, and then Hinduism. Hinduism and Buddhism you actually could put together because Buddhism was a daughter, a faith of Hinduism, actually. And faith-wise, and what they believe and what they and how they do is not different. It's just one believes in a big pantheon of gods, and the other believes in just obtaining enlightenment, which is pretty good because there is nothing in Buddhism that is contrary to anything in Judaism. In fact, there are a whole bunch of Jews who are also, they'll say they're Buddhist also, and they're Jew-boos. I'm not making that up. That was made up by somebody else prior to me. Where does Judaism fit in? How many practitioners of Judaism do you think there are in the world? That's a better question.
I know
15 million.
Pardon?
15 million?
15 million? Okay. Any other guesses?
think it's higher than that. 10% of the followers of a faith in the US, I thought, were Jewish.
It's only about 2%
Okay.
actually in the United States because there are 360 million people in the United States now, and there are about 6 million Jews and 6 million to 7 million Jews in the United States, and a little bit more than that in Israel, and then less than 1 million around the world.
Wow.
So there are approximately 15 million Jews throughout the world. Yeah.
That's shocking that there's only 1 million outside of Israel and the US. That's absolutely shocking to me.
Well, there used to be 2 million in Poland prior to 1937.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But
I think we're 0.01% globally. If my statistic may be wrong.
0.01% globally, but what percentage of Nobel laureates? About 20% of Nobel laureates are Jews. That's amazing. People always will say, well, it's a Judeo-Christian ethic. Well, actually, it's not. It's become what they're saying has become a Christian ethic. Judaism is a little different. It's similar, but a little different. We'll get into that. But the all of those getting back, all of those cults coalesced into one worship form in Jerusalem, at the temple in Jerusalem, because King Josiah declared that that's where we're going to do it. And he was the most powerful individual in that area. And he sent his forces into all the city states who had satellite temples, and they were all destroyed, except for a couple that weren't destroyed that people actually buried. And that is really cool because archaeologists have found them almost intact, no burning, no destruction, and I've been able to piece them back together. And I wish I almost wore my T-shirt today with Adonai and his Asherah, God and his wife, which was on cult items in that particular temple. That one of them was about 50 miles south of Jerusalem, that was uncovered, that had been buried. And this was on ritual items, picture on ritual items in there. Do a Google search of Adonai, Adonai, and his Asherah, Ashurah, and you will be able to see some really cool pictures of God and his wife. And yeah, at one time God had a wife. So because, well, every man had a wife or more. So why wouldn't God have a wife? That's silly. But in and around between the beginning of the 7th and beginning of the 8th century, before the beginning of the 7th century to the 5th century before the Common Era, the cult was consolidated with worship of Yah, and you'll see it printed Yahweh, but it was Yah. There was no way to it. It was just Yah. And he became the primary god of the folks in the Levant, who became the Jews. Well, how did he actually become from these guys who had temples and made offerings of slaughtered animals to God with, cutting throats and blood and capturing blood and throwing blood on altars and burning parts of animals and sometimes all the animals, and then ritually eating most of the animals. Only at certain points and for certain types of sins did one burn up an entire animal. So most of the time, that was how the priests got fed, is because priests didn't have day jobs, and they got fed by people bringing food and grain and vegetables and fruits and such to the temple. And part of it was burned up because God likes the smell of barbecue, but he doesn't eat. So he got the wonderful smell of barbecue, and the priest ate the barbecue. And then we go to these folks who pray 3 times a day, and and have these holy books, and we study these holy books, and we write other holy books. How did we get there? Oh my God. It wasn't overnight, but it was almost overnight. Something happened in the middle of the 7th century, before the Common Era, to the what was known as the Northern Kingdom, the 10 tribes that were not Judah, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. They were all consolidated into the Assyrian kingdom. Most of the people were taken away from what was Israel at that time, and taken north into Mesopotamia, to Assyria. They were completely assimilated we never heard from again. Those are the lost 10 tribes that we're always hearing about, that people who built this in North America were the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Bullpucky. They were all assimilated into Assyrian society, and they disappeared. There was Judah, or Yehuda, the kingdom of Yehuda, and the tribes of Yehuda, Judah, and Benjamin, lasted a little bit longer. When the Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians did the same thing to the Judeans. However, the Judeans maintained their identity in captivity in Babylon. Number one, because they were only in Babylon for a cup of coffee before there was another entity that came into Babylon, conquered Babylon, and totally culturally wiped out Babylon and Babylonian society, and that was the Persians. And the Persians were, unlike the Babylonians and unlike the Assyrians before them, were quite tolerant of anybody wanting to believe anything they wanted to believe in. So the Hebrew people, if we want to call them at that time, or the Judeans would probably be a better idea because they were from the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, the Judeans, maintained their faith to a point. They no longer had a temple with which to have all these ritual slaughter of animals and barbecues for God and all of these priesthood. And so all of that really disappeared. Prayer replaced animal slaughter in the temple as two ways to worship God. Prayer became more important. Reading and writing became more important because the individuals who were taken from Judea and taken in captivity to Babylon were those individuals who could read and write. So if you could read and write, you taught your children to read and write. And once you got to Babylonia, you were only there for a cup of coffee, and then the Persians come in. Of course, you taught everybody to read and write. And you took your holy books with you because, woe and behold, holy books were actually written down at that time. Prior to about that 600 to 700 before the Common Era time, all of the holy books of the Hebrews and all of the stories and all of the things that would become the books of prophets, etc., 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 were all oral tradition, and you memorized it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hebrew language, but most Hebrew prayers and Hebrew scripture, especially the Torah and the other books of the Hebrew Bible, can be chanted, and such as there's right after the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You would chant that, then you would sit down and you would chant what is known as the Ve'ahavta, and you shall teach your children. You teach this to your children. You shall post this on the doorpost of your gates, that you will put it as frontlets before your eyes and place it as a mark upon your hand. And these are things you shall do. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol levavacha u'v'kol nafshecha u'v'kol me'odecha. Why do we chant it? Because you can remember a song much better than you can remember a poem, or you can remember prose. If you've ever had to learn in grammar school, when we all had to learn the the preamble to the Constitution, or the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence. It was much easier to learn the ABC song because there was a song to go with it. And how many of us right now could go into A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and know the song perfectly well, or BINGO, or I'm Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, all of those, and nursery rhymes. All of those things can be sung and you remember it. And it's the same thing with that. However, people were afraid that there might come a time when people might not be able to remember it, or something would happen. So we better write this down. And while we're writing it down, why don't we add some things too? And they did, quite a number. And we'll get into that. After the Babylonians' conquest and the Persian kingdom, and they were there for a while, a new king of Persia came to power, and he looked around and said, "Why are you guys here?" He said, "Well, the other guy, your predecessor, took us from our homeland." He says, "Y'all want to go back?" Well, some of them did. Most of them didn't. Only a very small number of the Hebrew people went back to Jerusalem in and around 500, 550, between 500, 550 before the Common Era. So they were there for about 80 years, and then they went back. But 80 years, how many generations in 80 years? If you really look at 20 years being a generation, and it's probably in earlier times, how many of you had grandparents or great grandparents that got married at age 15, or the boys were 17, the girls were 13. That was the norm prior to the early part of the 20th century. Worldwide, that was the norm. It was still the norm going back. As soon as you could have children, you had children. As soon as you could support a family, you had a family. And that was at age 14, 15 for a guy, because he went into the family business, which was generally farming around the world. There weren't any major cities really until the medieval period. In what we think, well, we could get into that because there were some here in North America. They were huge, much huger than anything in what we know as Europe. Is where the soul of man lived, was Europe. That's all racist, but that's my biases are showing. But some people went back and they rebuilt the temple, and they started doing the ritual slaughter of animals, things that they had been doing prior to going to Babylon/Persia. Whereas the folks in Persia continued to do what they were doing, which was prayer replaced ritual slaughter of animals, because there was no temple there. And there was communication between the people in Persia and the folks back in Jerusalem. And there continued to be communication primarily in the form of letter writing, something that we do, but it's an email, and it's broken English, or it's a text and it's pictures and broken English, or whatever language your vernacular is. But letters went back and forth, and it may be generations of individuals answering these letters, because sometimes it took a year and a half, 2 years, if the letter even made it. And then if you didn't get a response within a year, you wrote another one, and it may make it, because they went back and forth. Because wonderfully, the reason that anyone ever wanted to live in the Levant it was the nexus of trade between what we call the Far East, the big groups of people in China, Indochina, Vietnam, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. They all had stuff that the people west of them wanted, and people west in the west had things that the people in the east wanted, and they traded. And the nexus of trade was right there in Israel. That was the jumping off to go into the Mediterranean area, and it was the starting point of the caravans going further into Asia. And so it's been important until recently, until we have things like ships that can go through the Suez Canal and circumvent all of that, and aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. So it's no longer that major jumping off point. But it was up until really into the medieval period, into the modern period, until we got things like the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. It was still important because things went overland even in the 20th century. So you had two areas of primary groups of individuals who would become the Jews. Those who continued to use ritual slaughter, but because they were communicating with those individuals, they started to, in and around probably around the 2nd century before the Common Era, they started to question, do we need to be doing this ritual slaughter of animals? Is this the way God really wants to do? And there was a certain group of individuals in Jerusalem and in and around Jerusalem that started thinking that maybe they shouldn't. And those people were the Pharisees. They were the guys who started thinking that we need to, prayer needs to replace this ritual slaughter of animals. And probably one of the most important of the Pharisees was a guy named Joshua ben Yosef. You might know him as Jesus. How we got Jesus out of Joshua ben Yosef is a whole class in and of itself. It goes from the Hebrew, Aramaic to the Greek to the Latin to German to English, and nobody realized that his name was Joshua. But anyway, he likely was a Pharisee. There were Christians who would argue with me, but that's fine. They can argue with me. I don't mind. Around the 2nd century BCE, that area of the world was taken over by a guy named Alexander from Macedonia. We know him, and he was pretty cool, so everybody called him Alexander the Pretty Great. So he took over that area, and as his custom was, he put people who were in charge over the areas, local people. So the local people who were in charge were Syrians who embraced the Greek ideals, the Greek language, et cetera, and a lot of people in Judea embraced the Hellenistic movement real big, and were speaking Greek, learning Greek, writing in Greek. And there was a group of individuals who really didn't like it and were pretty upset because they were going to lose their livelihood. And those were the guys who were the high priest and priest in the temple. And we know those guys as the Maccabees. And they were the guys who were famous for all of the Hanukkah story. If you're familiar with that, if not, we'll be discussing that later. They were actually really reactionary and horrible people. But we've got a whole big holiday and we celebrate their lives and what they did. We just don't talk about them very much after that because they really were horrible people and they did some horrible things. They were the only people who ever converted people to Judaism against their will. But we got paid back because Herod the Great and Herod Antipas both were that group of people, the Samaritans, who were the people who were converted by force. But we got paid back because those were nasty guys too, and they became the rulers. In and around first century, in the middle of the first century, before the Common Era, another group of people came in, and those were the Romans. They conquered the entire area, set up Roman rule, and Roman rule persisted until the Roman Empire collapsed in sometime in and around between 400 after the of the Common Era to about 500 of the Common Era, depending on how you define fall of the Roman Empire. It is my contention that the Roman Empire did not fall; it simply became the Christian Church. And in that, I say that because the hierarchy of the original Christian Church is the hierarchy of the Roman military, exactly, with the emperor being the Pope on down to cardinals, bishops, and priests, and then lay people, soldiers. After 70 of the Common Era, the Jews got the Romans got tired of the Judeans and got tired of all of their mess, and they destroyed the temple and started sending people out of Judea, which they then called Palestine, because that was an insult, because Palestrina was the home of the Philistines, who were always the classical enemies of the Hebrew people throughout the latter part of the Bronze Age and the early part of early and the beginnings of the Iron Age. And that's the beginning of what we call the diaspora, when the Hebrew peoples went to North Africa, went up into Asia Minor, went into what is the Greek Peloponnesus, went into the Italian peninsula, on into Sephardia or Spain, or into the area of Ashkenaz, which means German, but at that time it was the Frankish Empire, or the beginnings of the Frankish Empire. So we get those people. Jews also went to a little earlier than that happening. They went to China and also went to India. These were primarily people who were doing this trading along the Silk Road and trading across in these from the area that is now Somalia, going across. They had settled there and went across to what is now India and the city of Goa, and back and forth till they didn't go back and forth anymore, and they settled in the city of Goa. There were those people that were sailing in those weird looking lateen sailed, that triangular sailed ship that you always see, the Barbary pirates sailing around, and when our Marines have to go fight the Barbary pirates in the 19th century. It's that type of, it's called a dhow, but it was an Islamic type. The Islamic people developed it, but the Jews of Goa did that. Got a wonderful cookbook of the Jews of Goa, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Indian cuisine. There is a dessert called I think it's called Galub Jum or Galub Jamun. Galub Jamun. There we go. It's a round cake ball that is fried in oil and then put into a syrup, a sugar syrup that is infused with cardamom and cinnamon and all kind of wonderful spices. That's their Hanukkah food. And I can understand that because I had some Sunday, and it wasn't even Hanukkah. Um, but the Jews of Kaifeng in China and the Jews of Goa, the Jews of Goa are still there. The Jews of Kaifeng were completely assimilated into Chinese culture. And their people there can still show genetic traces of these um, Hebrew people, but they are no longer a separate culture group in China. It was thought that this probably happened sometime in the medieval period. Yeah, there are people there who can claim. Natalie says, "I think there are still people there." Yes, there are people who can claim it genetically, but as a culture, there is no Jewish or Hebrew culture of people still living in China. Much to our chagrin, that would be fun. But uh, primarily, initially, you had two divisions of Jews. Jews who stayed in the what we call the Near East, in Persia, in what became Palestine, um, you know, that area of the Levant, North Africa, um, on into the Greek Peloponnesus and over into Spain. We would have all called those all Sephardic Jews. Really, that's a big lump because there was a lot of differences between these cultured people, especially what they ate and what they, their food ways and the way they prayed and the language that they use. Jews have used a lot of languages. Everything is written in the Hebrew script, but you had initially Aramaic was the first thing. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, was translated into Aramaic and then into Greek, but it was all written in Hebrew script, except for the Greek. They wrote it in Greek script for whatever reason. Judeo-Arabic, it was Arabic language of after 700 of the Common Era, into areas of Persia, Afghanistan, all into India, all through there. The Islamic people just moved right through that part of Asia into Western Asia as far as the Danube River before they got stopped militarily by individuals who say, we don't want Islam in our Christian area. So they got together for the first time ever and defeated the Islamic forces there at the Danube River, and it stopped there. However, there are remnants of those Islamic peoples still live in the Balkans, especially in Albania and in Serbia. There are still a number of Islamic folks living there. But Jews lived amongst the Islamic folks in Palestine, in Persia, in North Africa, throughout the Asia Minor up into what is now Turkey, for 1,000 years without a whole lot of big problem. The biggest thing is the Jewish people were always a minority, and so they were never a military threat. And they were under the idea of, in many times, you didn't convert anyone into Islam. That was starting in and around 700. But prior to that, is you didn't convert anyone to Christianity. I mean, you didn't convert anyone to Judaism in the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire around the year 330 became Christian, and under the penalty of death, you didn't convert anybody to your faith. You could keep your faith, but you couldn't convert anybody, so Jews stopped openly converting people. Because prior to about 250, almost 300 of the Common Era, you had as many people who converted to Judaism as you did to any other faith in the Mediterranean area. There are many Jews who, as I said, went to the Frankish kingdom. That's the area we now know as France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, etc. And those people moved east out of necessity after the First Crusade in and around 1099. Those people started moving east, what few people were left. It is estimated that the Jewish people in that were living in the Frankish kingdom and living in what we now know as Germany, France, etc., were not decimated, because decimation means 1 out of 10. They were almost annihilated. It was almost a true genocide. I don't know how many of you are aware, but in what is known as Ashkenazi Jews, Jews of Germany, Ashkenaz means Germany in Hebrew, and it means all of the Jews that were in Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, and Central Europe are known as Ashkenazi Jews. There are 5 genetic disorders to which the flesh is heir to if you have Ashkenazi heritage. In order to have 5 different genetic disorders, you had to have been taken down to a breeding population of around 350 individuals. And that is known as the Ashkenazi bottleneck of the 12th century. It is something that is of recent writing. There is still research going on, but it started all with a mathematician who looks at the rate of genetic disorders in population groups throughout the world and what the predominance is. And in order to get 5, that's about what you'd have to, mathematically, you'd have to be down to about 350 individuals. Now, individuals who were quote unquote Sephardic Jews, those living outside of, the Frankish kingdom and, those areas, were not affected by that. And they don't have they have some different genetic disorders, some that are similar to sickle cell, but that's not in those 5 wonderful things that the Ashkenazi Jews have. But that's just one of those interesting things. The Hebrew people actually became the Jewish people in Persia pretty early on, and after the destruction of the temple, all of the people who were living in Palestine and then moved out pretty much followed the same way. There was this evolution of prayer taking over the rituals, slaughter of animals, because after 70 AD, when the Romans completely destroyed the temple, there was no place left to do this worship. And the tradition was, if you didn't do it in Jerusalem at the temple, you just didn't do it. Let's see. I know we've gone over our time. Spent a lot of time initially with housekeeping stuff. But we get to the modern era. And I say the modern era, that starts in and around, really around the 14th century, or actually the 13th century is the modern era, where you have the ability, just about every Jewish person in the world at that time could read and write. There were some that were living in parts of Africa and parts of what was then Persia or Afghanistan or India, or whatever, that may not have been able to, very poor people, and some of the very poor people who were living in Northern Europe and Eastern Europe. But most of the individuals in the Frankish kingdom and most of the individuals in Spain could read and write in their vernacular and Hebrew. And it's kind of funny. One of our sages of the Middle Ages, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, who's known affectionately as Rashi, because we'll get to that later on, but Jews love acronyms. Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak is Rashi. It's much easier to say Rashi than that mouthful. But we know a lot about the Frankish language because of the notes that he wrote in his students' notebooks. We're able to go, oh, it's very much a Germanic sort of Frankish French language. It evolved from a Germanic into a Romance language, and there is that Frankish language is that transition period, and we know about the Frankish language because of Rashi and the fact that he wrote notes for his students, and because he had a school, he had disciples. If you catch my drift, you're familiar with Western religions. Prior to 1492, Jews were completely welcome in Spain. In 1496, in Portugal, Jews given one of three choices. You can stay and convert to Christianity. You can stay and not convert, in which you will be burned at the stake. And three, you can leave with what you can take with you on your in your hands and on your back, basically. And you can sell your real estate and all of your goods at pesos on the dollar, or whatever, pennies on the dollar, centavos on the peso. There we go. And most of the people did leave. Some of the people got executed, not many, and some people converted, but not really. And we'll talk about those at a later time with a little bit more depth. But a lot of people don't know about the Jews being totally annihilated at the time of the Crusades. And most people don't know that the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, along with Columbus sailing the ocean blue, because that's all we ever learned in school. There was no really Jewish denominations per se. You had Ashkenazic Jews and you had Sephardic Jews, but that was a cultural ideal. And the Sephardic Jews, primarily from Spain and Portugal, spoke Ladino, which was Spanish written in Hebrew script. And that spread to North Africa because that was the closest place to go from Spain after everybody was let go. Ladino and the people who spoke it moved to North Africa. They moved into what is now Greece, into Turkey, and so that language spread into there. Then you had the formation of the people who spoke Yiddish, which in German means Jewish. And so basically, Yiddish was vernacular Jewish, vernacular German written in Hebrew script. And when the Jewish people left the Germanic states primarily and went to Eastern Europe, which is now Poland and Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Russia, and all of the other, Bulgaria, on up into Serbia, Romania, etc. They took that language with them. So you had the division of Sephardic Jews, those who lived in the Mediterranean and North Africa and Persia, and then you had primarily those who lived in Eastern Europe and the few who stayed in Western Europe speaking Yiddish. And so you had the Sephardic, German, and the Spanish. The Sephardic Spanish and the Ashkenazic German. And those were the two major things. There was a big shift in the end of the not the Romantic, but the Age of Enlightenment, the middle of the 18th to the sort of middle of the beginnings of the 19th century. You had this Age of Enlightenment when you had the American Revolution and the French Revolution and John Locke's writings and all of these other things going on with the rights of man and the rights of people. In reaction to all of that, we had the reform in Judaism. The reform movement started in the late 18th century, early 19th century in Germany. From there, it spread all around in Europe, and then eventually in the middle of the 19th century, it migrated into what was then the United States, had become the United States. And Mikveh Israel in Savannah was leaning toward reform thinking in the middle of the latter part of the 19th century, 1870s, 1880, when there was a schism of people who decided that, I'd really like to sit in services with my wife and female children without everybody being separated. And I think we're going to start doing that. And then there are people who said, well, that is horrible. We can't do that. We're going to break away and form our own temple, and we're going to call that B'nai Brit Yaakov, B'nai Brit Jacob. And we're going to eventually move to Durin and Abercorn Street in Savannah and become eventually, they were the individuals who became what we know as modern Orthodox, when modern Orthodoxy became a thing, in and around the first part of the 20th century. But later, in about 1905, you had individuals and this was happening not only in Savannah, Georgia, but this was happening all over the United States with Jewish temples. Ideas changing. And you had other people going, I don't like the way you're actually going, because in 1905, Temple of Mikveh Israel actually embraced the reform movement, although it had been around since 1840 in the United States, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Another group broke off from that, and they formed their own group, Agudit Achim, and they eventually ended up off of Abercorn Street between Abercorn and White Bluff Road. And in the 1920s, when the conservative movement started, they embraced the conservative movement. So that's why Savannah has 3 of the major denominations, and that was a good way of showing sort of how they came about. Before that, everybody was just a Jew, either Sephardic whatever. But the Sephardic people could worship together with the Ashkenazic people, and they often did when they came to North America, because there wasn't enough Jewish people around to have separate synagogues for Ashkenazic and Sephardic people, because there were so few Jews. So if you wanted a minyan, you worshiped, which is 10 adult men, you worshiped with whoever you could worship with. And we sort of got a mishmash of that. And that's what happened in Savannah. We initially was 40 Sephardic families and 2 Ashkenazic families. And as the War of Jenkins' Ear came about in Savannah, the Sephardic Jews moved farther north because they were afraid the Spanish were actually going to take over the new fledgling Georgia colony, which they never did, but which is good. But what I'll do next week is I will actually go over in depth a little bit more how modern Orthodoxy, the Reform movement, the conservative movement, and the Reconstructionist movement actually the differences in worship form and in dogma. There's very little dogma in Judaism, but there's some. And I'll explain that. Dogma is just, this is right because. And there's a little bit of that. It's not a lot. There's a lot more in other faiths, but there's still a little bit. But I actually prefer data over dogma. So I prefer to read the scriptures literarily rather than literally, and that's the way I teach. I'm gonna stop there because I've gone over a whole pile of stuff and transversed probably a good 3,500 years in a short period of time, which each of these topics that I talked about could be a semester in college, and we still could expand on it, which is good, which you can do, because there's a lot of reading you can do. I gave you a list of some suggested reading, and those are good starters. Yeah, by the end of the course, I'm going to compile a list of novels that I think are good to read. It is really a good way to learn Jewish culture and ritual by looking at characters throughout the centuries. And there are some good novels that cover really from the medieval period to the modern period. And it's nice to see how these people are worshiping, how these people are praying, how these people ritually do things, the ritual meals, etc. And you can learn a heck of a lot from a good, well-researched novel. And I can recommend some, because I won't recommend them unless they're well-researched and they actually are telling you stuff that ain't hoo-hoo. Are there any questions, concerns before we sign off? I did not mention that to everybody because some of you came in a little bit later than others, but we are also streaming live on YouTube. And also with that, you can go to the Mikveh Israel website. If you miss a class, it will be very easy to go to the Mikveh Israel website and look at the YouTube class. And before each class, I will tell you, is this class number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, etc., and what the topic is of the day, so that you'll be able to go through and pick them out as you need them. This has been fun for me. I know I've kept you an hour and a half when I said it was just going to be about an hour, but
I do have a question. Is because there are something like 15 classes, and I apologize for coming in late, but is there a curriculum or syllabus out there?
Yes, I can send that to you. I'm not sure if I have your email address, but if you'll hold back. I can get your email information.
Me
And
too. I don't think you have mine either. I don't
okay,
think, yeah.
all right. Then I can get this information. I can send that to you. So if you two, otherwise, if there are no more questions or concerns, we can sign off, and I will see you next week. And let me get a pen so I can write this stuff down because I am not all that computer literate. I know what I know to do, and I can do it well. But as far as learning stuff, somebody's got to show me. All right, and okay. Adam Saslow.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. You can just cut and paste it.
Might not work for him.
All right, chat. Here we go.
Maybe.
Oh, there we go.
I'll send mine over too.
Okay. No, I definitely did not get YouTube, but that's fine. That's great. I will, as soon as I sign out, I will send you all information.
Right.
Okay, thank you. See you next week.
Okay.
Good day.
Well,
All
have a
right.
good one.
Good night, Ann.
Good night.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see y'all later.